Every morning in a small village in Lusaka province, a girl named Ebony walked to school with a cardboard box over her head. The box had holes cut out for her eyes so she could see, but it was big and awkward. She wore it to hide the burned scars that covered her face, scars from a fire long ago. The other children stared at her, some pointed, some laughed. Many called her a witch. Even the teachers never looked her in the eye. They spoke over her, never to her. Slowly, Ebony began to feel like a shadow, not a person. She sat at the back of the class, quiet, small, hoping the day would end quickly. Every step in the hallway, every whisper behind her back, felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. No one asked why she wore the box. No one cared. It was easier for them to pretend she wasn't there at all. But Ebony came back every day, even when it hurt, even when the dust on the road felt softer than the stairs in school. Under that box, she cried sometimes. But under that box, she also dreamed. Of a day she wouldn't have to hide. Of a day someone might see her not with fear, but with kindness. She didn't know how or when, but something inside her whispered that this box wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Ebony was just 8 years old when her whole world changed forever. It was a quiet evening, and her mother was cooking over a small fire, like she always did. Ebony sat nearby, playing with stones and singing softly to herself. Then suddenly, the pot tipped. The fire caught the edge of the mat and spread quickly. Smoke filled the tiny room. Flames danced along the walls. Ebony screamed. Before she could move, her mother rushed to her and wrapped her arms around her, shielding her from the fire. The pain was sharp, hot, and fast. Her mother pushed her out of the door, but didn't make it out herself. Ebony was burned, but alive. Her mother was gone. The neighbors came running, but it was too late. They looked at Ebony with wide eyes, not just in pity, but in fear. The burns on her face and arms were terrible. Some said it was a curse. Some said she must be a bad omen. Her father couldn't take it. He left the village days later and never came back. No goodbye. No promise to return. Just silence. Ebony was left alone, burned, grieving, and surrounded by people who didn't want to look at her. Whispers followed her everywhere she went. Even strangers stared at her as if she was not a child but something strange. She stayed with her aunt, who gave her food and a place to sleep, but love was missing from that house. Ebony often sat by the fire, not too close, and stared into the flames, remembering her mother's last hug. It was warm, full of love, and painful all at once. She couldn't stop asking herself, why did her mother have to die? Why did her father leave? Why did everyone look at her like she was a monster? But in the middle of all those painful questions, one feeling stayed strong: she was alive. Her mother gave her life twice, once at birth, and once in that fire. As Ebony grew older, she tried to hide her scars behind clothes, behind silence, behind the cardboard box she would one day wear to school. But the pain wasn't just on her skin. It lived in her heart. The fire had taken her mother. It had taken her father. It had taken the joy from her childhood. And yet, deep down, it had also left her with something strange and strong, the feeling that she had survived for a reason. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she imagined her mother smiling down at her, telling her, "You are more than your scars." But when she opened her eyes, all she saw were the stares, the whispers, and the way people moved away from her like she was dangerous. She didn't understand it, but she held on. She kept waking up. She kept going to school. She kept hoping, even when it hurt. She had nothing, but maybe, just maybe, she still had a future. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the pain, a tiny spark remained. A spark her mother had saved. A spark that refused to die. The school rooftop was filled with laughter, music, and clapping hands. It was the award ceremony, one of the happiest days of the year. Students wore clean uniforms, proud parents held phones up high, and teachers smiled like everything was perfect. But in the back corner, standing quietly alone, was Ebony. She wore her usual cardboard box over her head, the one with small holes cut out so she could see. No one looked at her. No one sat near her. Some even shifted away like her very presence might bring bad luck. She had gotten used to that. She had accepted being invisible. But something felt different in the air that day. The principal walked up to the small stage with a microphone in hand. His voice was calm and strong as he looked over the crowd. "Today," he said, "we're not just here to celebrate grades or prizes. We're here to celebrate kindness. Real strength is not how smart you are, but how you treat those around you. It's time we raise each other up." Then he paused. And looked straight at Ebony. Her heart began to beat faster. Her hands felt cold. The box on her head felt heavier than ever. Everyone around her turned to look. Some whispered. Some stared. For a moment, time stood still. Ebony felt like the ground might break beneath her. But slowly, so slowly, she raised her hands. Her fingers touched the edge of the box. She took a deep breath. And then, in front of everyone, she lifted the box off her head. A silence fell across the rooftop. Her scars caught the sunlight. Her eyes, wide and wet with tears, scanned the crowd. She could feel every single pair of eyes pressing into her. Not one person looked away. Some were shocked. Some looked guilty. One or two looked down in shame. She stood there, shaking, but she didn't run. She didn't hide. The air on her face felt strange, cold, and free all at once. She had always imagined this moment in nightmares, but now it was real, and she was still standing. From somewhere in the crowd, a phone clicked. Someone had taken a photo. She didn't know who, but she didn't care. Because in that second, she wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't just the girl behind the box. She was Ebony, burned, broken, but still brave. The principal gave a small nod. No more words were needed. Her action had said everything. Then, something unexpected happened. One student started clapping. Then another. And then more. The clapping grew louder, spreading like a wave. It wasn't fake. It wasn't forced. It was real. Ebony's chin lifted slightly. She blinked away tears and allowed herself the smallest smile. The box that once hid her lay forgotten at her feet. The wind picked it up and pushed it gently away, like it no longer belonged with her. She didn't chase it. She didn't need it anymore. That day on the rooftop, something changed. Not just for Ebony, but for everyone who saw her. Her silence spoke louder than any speech ever could. When Ebony removed the cardboard box from her head during the school award ceremony, she didn't know that someone was watching closely, not just with eyes, but with heart. A journalist, who had come to cover the event for a small local newspaper, had been standing quietly in the corner, camera hanging around his neck. He wasn't paying attention to the awards or the speeches. His eyes were drawn to the girl in the back, the one with the box. He noticed the way the crowd turned, the silence that followed, and then, click. At the exact moment Ebony lifted the box and showed her face, he captured it. Her eyes were red from crying, her scars lit by sunlight, and yet, she stood. Not hidden. Not broken. Just, brave. That single photo said more than words ever could. Later that evening, the journalist posted it online with a short caption, "She took off the box. She showed us what real strength looks like." He added a hashtag that came to him in that moment, #HerFaceHerStrength. At first, only a few people saw it. But within hours, it started spreading. First in Lusaka. Then across Zambia. Then far beyond. People everywhere began to share the photo. Thousands of comments flooded in. I don't know her, but I'm proud of her. This girl is a warrior. Her scars are more beautiful than any makeup. By morning, the photo had gone viral. It was on the front page of newspapers. It was shown on TV. Social media was filled with drawings, poems, and messages about Ebony. People were inspired not just because of how she looked, but because of what she did. She had faced her biggest fear. And she didn't run. In the middle of it all, Ebony sat quietly at home, still in disbelief. Her aunt's phone kept buzzing with notifications. Neighbors came by just to show her the photo. They were smiling. Not laughing, smiling. And for the first time, Ebony didn't feel like hiding. She didn't feel like running. She just looked at the screen, her own face staring back, and whispered to herself, "That's me." More surprises came. NGOs reached out, offering support. Schools invited her to speak. Letters came from burn survivors saying, "You gave me hope." A girl from a nearby village even sent a drawing of Ebony wearing a golden crown, made out of cardboard. At school, things changed too. The same students who once whispered, which now walked past her with quiet respect. Some even said hello. A few girls asked if she needed help with homework. No one touched the box anymore. It sat in the corner of her room, empty, forgotten, like a chapter that had ended. The photo didn't just change how the world saw Ebony. It changed how Ebony saw herself. She had once believed that her scars made her weak. But now she knew they were proof that she had survived something most people never could. Her story wasn't hidden anymore. It was out in the open, bold and unshaken. And it all started with one photo. One brave moment. One girl who chose to be seen. A few weeks after the photo of Ebony went viral, her quiet world began to change in ways she never imagined. One morning, as she was helping her aunt sweep the front yard, a letter arrived. It was brought by a man on a motorbike who wore a university logo on his shirt. He handed it to her with a smile and said, "This is for you, Ebony." She took the envelope with both hands, not knowing what to expect. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside was a letter from a top university in Zambia. They had seen her story. They had read about her courage. And now, they were offering her a full scholarship. Ebony stared at the letter, her eyes wide, lips shaking. Her aunt hugged her tightly and cried tears of joy. The same girl who once hid behind a box was now being invited to study at a place she never even dreamed of. The university didn't just want her for her story, they believed in her future. Soon after, journalists came back, this time to interview her. Big TV shows, popular online channels, and newspapers all wanted to hear her voice. She was nervous at first, but each time she spoke, her words grew stronger. She told the world about the fire, the pain, the bullying, and the day she took off the box. Celebrities began reposting her picture, calling her brave, calling her a role model. One famous singer said, "She's not just a survivor, she's a queen." NGOs reached out from different parts of the country. They wanted to help her and others like her. Some offered clothes, books, therapy, and even workshops for burn survivors. Ebony accepted the help, but she never let it change her heart. She still swept the yard with her aunt every morning. She still walked the same dusty roads to the market. But now, people looked at her differently. They didn't stare with fear or pity, they looked with pride. Children waved. Women smiled. Some even stopped her just to say, "Thank you." But the biggest change wasn't what people did. It was what Ebony felt inside. She had a goal now. A reason to wake up every morning with energy. She wanted to study social work. She wanted to help children who felt invisible, just like she once did. She walked with her head higher, her steps firmer. The road was still rough, but she no longer saw it as a burden. It was her path. And she was ready. One day, she passed the school where everything had started. Some kids were playing outside. One of them wore a cardboard box on his head, pretending to be Ebony. The others were clapping for him and cheering. It wasn't mockery, it was admiration. She smiled and kept walking. Ebony was still the same girl who had known pain, loneliness, and shame. But now, she carried something else, purpose. The same scars that once made her feel small were now the very reason people stood up and listened. And even though the world around her had changed, she stayed grounded, knowing exactly where she came from, and where she was going. 3 years had passed since Ebony last walked through the gates of her old school. But this time, she wasn't a student with her head down and a box hiding her face. She was returning as a guest speaker, invited to share her story. The school had changed a little, new paint on the walls, new students playing in the yard, but the memories felt fresh, like they had just happened yesterday. She took a deep breath as she stepped through the gates, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with purpose. The event was held on the rooftop again, just like the day everything changed. Chairs were set up, teachers stood by, and cameras were ready to stream her speech live. The air was filled with quiet curiosity. Whispers traveled fast, is that really her? That's Ebony. Some of her old classmates were there, now older, taller, but their eyes showed the same surprise. She had returned. Not hidden. Not broken. But strong. When Ebony walked to the stage, she didn't rush. She walked with calm confidence. Her scars were still visible, but they no longer made her feel small. They made her feel real. She stood at the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. Some were smiling. Some were already wiping away tears. She began to speak, her voice soft but clear. I once sat right here, she said, pointing to the back row, wearing a carton over my head because I was afraid to be seen. A hush fell over the crowd. I thought if people saw my face, they would turn away. I believed my scars were something to hide. She paused for a moment. A breeze swept across the rooftop, just like that day years ago. But I was wrong, she continued. Scars don't make us weak. They prove we survived. They tell our story when we can't find the words. As she shared her journey, about the fire, losing her mother, the pain of bullying, and the day her photo went viral, many students began to cry. A few teachers stood quietly at the back, hands over their hearts. Even the classmates who once called her names couldn't look away. They had never imagined the strength it took to carry all that pain and still rise. Ebony didn't just talk about herself. She spoke for every child who ever felt unseen, for every girl who thought she had to hide to be safe. You don't have to wear a mask to be accepted, she said. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. The applause was thunderous. Cameras caught every moment. The live stream flooded with comments, I'm crying. She's a warrior. This is the story the world needs. After her speech, students rushed to meet her. Some asked for hugs. Others just wanted to say thank you. A small boy looked up at her and whispered, "You're my hero." Ebony smiled, tears in her eyes, and replied, "I was once just like you." She left the stage that day not as a guest, but as a symbol. Still burned. Still scarred. But more than anything, still standing. And now, she wasn't invisible. She was unforgettable. The rooftop was quiet again. The students had returned to their seats after giving Ebony a long standing ovation. Her speech had touched every heart, but something even deeper was about to unfold. As she stood near the edge of the stage, ready to leave, she saw a man standing in the very back row, alone, quiet, and trembling. He looked older than she remembered. His clothes were simple, his face lined with guilt, and his eyes full of something she hadn't seen in years, regret. It was her father. He hadn't been there since the fire. Not when she cried through the pain. Not when she struggled to go back to school. Not when she walked the streets with a carton on her head to hide her face. He had disappeared, leaving her to face the world alone. But now, there he was, standing in silence while the entire school stared, unsure of what would happen next. Ebony didn't cry. Her hands didn't shake. She took a breath and stepped back to the microphone. The cameras were still rolling. Students looked between her and the man in the back. Some recognized him. Some didn't. But everyone could feel the weight in the air. "There's one more thing I want to say," she said, looking straight ahead. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "There was someone I waited for. Someone I needed the most when the fire took everything. But he left." She paused, and even the wind seemed to stop. "He left because he couldn't face my scars. Maybe he thought I wouldn't forgive him. Maybe he thought I wouldn't survive." Ebony looked up, directly at the man. Her father's eyes filled with tears. His hands gripped the back of the chair in front of him. "But I did survive," she said. "And I forgive him." The moment those words left her mouth, the man fell to his knees, sobbing into his hands. The crowd gasped. Some students began to cry again. A teacher gently walked over to him, but he couldn't stop the tears. Years of silence, guilt, and shame came pouring out in front of everyone. Ebony stood there, watching. She didn't rush to him. She didn't run away either. She just stood tall, with grace in her heart and power in her eyes. Because she wasn't that little girl waiting at the door anymore. She had become someone strong enough to forgive the man who had once abandoned her. The cameras caught every second of it. The internet, once filled with her photo and the hashtag #HerFaceHerStrength, now had a new moment. A new picture, a girl standing strong, and a broken man on his knees. It wasn't about shame anymore. It was about healing. Later, Ebony walked past him. He looked up at her with eyes full of tears, and before he could speak, she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. That day, Ebony didn't just speak to her classmates or to the world. She spoke to her past. And by doing that, she freed herself completely. Still scarred. Still shining. And now, completely whole. Ebony sat in a warm, quiet room filled with faces just like hers, young burn survivors from across the city. Some wore long sleeves, some kept their heads down, and a few clung to small mirrors they couldn't bear to look into. They were scared, just like she once was. But today was different. Today, they weren't alone. Ebony had come, not as a guest, but as someone who had walked through the same fire, and survived. A filmmaker followed her, quietly capturing every word and moment. She didn't stand on a stage or use big words. She sat on the floor with the kids, her legs crossed, her scars visible, her voice calm and kind. The room went still as she began to speak. "I know what it feels like to be stared at," she said. "To walk in the market and see people turn away, or worse, whisper names. I used to wear a box on my head just to stop the world from seeing my face. But one day, I stopped hiding. Because these scars, they're not ugly. They're my story." The children stared at her, some wide-eyed, others blinking back tears. She reached for a small mirror and held it up. "Your scars are your stories," she said, slowly turning the mirror so they could all see their reflections. "Let the world read them, not judge them." A small boy raised his hand and asked, "But how can something broken be beautiful?" Ebony smiled, gently touching the scar on her cheek. "It's not broken. It's healed. That's the beauty. You lived. You survived. That's art, living, breathing, powerful art. Not on paper. Not in a frame. But right here, on our skin." The filmmaker zoomed in, catching every emotion on the kids' faces. One girl took off her scarf, revealing her burns for the first time in public. Another started drawing hearts on a notebook and called them my healing shapes. A movement was quietly being born in that small room. The short video that came from that day, titled Scars Are Stories, was shared around the world. People commented things like, "I see myself in her," and "Her strength gave me mine." It wasn't just burn survivors who were touched. People with emotional scars, invisible wounds, and painful pasts found light in Ebony's words. She kept visiting hospitals, shelters, and schools. Wherever she went, she repeated her message. Your face is not a shame. It's a canvas. Let your story shine. Artists started painting murals of her, not to hide the scars, but to celebrate them. Children began drawing themselves with golden scars like lightning bolts, symbols of strength, not sadness. In one powerful moment, Ebony stood in front of a group of girls, all burn survivors, and they painted her face with flowers, stars, and sunrises. Now, she told them, when people look at me, they won't just see what happened to me. They'll see what I became. And that's what she had become, a living work of art. Not perfect. Not smooth. But strong, true, and beautiful in a way the world could finally understand. Ebony once hid her face behind a cardboard box, hoping no one would notice her. The scars on her face made people stare, whisper, and sometimes laugh. She used to walk the school halls with her head down, feeling small and unwanted. But the girl who was once silent and afraid slowly grew into someone strong, bold, and full of purpose. After facing years of pain, judgment, and loneliness, Ebony made a powerful decision. She would not just survive, she would help others survive too. And that's how the Cartons to Crowns Foundation was born. The name of the foundation carried her journey in its heart. The carton represented the fear and shame she once carried on her shoulders. The crown stood for what she now believed in, dignity, pride, and self-worth. She wanted every burn survivor to know they didn't need to hide. They had nothing to be ashamed of. Their scars were not ugly, they were symbols of survival and strength. Through her foundation, Ebony started traveling to different cities and villages, meeting people who had been through similar pain. She organized workshops where burn survivors could come together, share their stories, cry, laugh, and slowly learn to heal. These workshops were full of love, support, and hope. For many, it was the first time someone had told them, "You are not broken." But Ebony didn't stop there. She brought color and confidence to the world through fashion shows where burn survivors walked proudly on stage. Wearing African prints and golden paper crowns, they smiled and strutted down the runway as the audience cheered and clapped. It wasn't about style, it was about strength. Each step on the runway shouted a message: we are still here. We are still beautiful. Social media soon caught on. Hashtags like #Cartons2Crowns and #ScarsOurStrength spread like wildfire. People started listening. News reporters told Ebony's story. Celebrities shared her videos. Schools began to invite her to speak. Hospitals began working with her foundation to help more survivors get treatment. And young people who had stopped going to school because of shame began returning, with new hope in their hearts. Ebony also made sure her foundation gave real help, medical care, school supplies, therapy, and scholarships. She wanted every survivor to know they had a future. Her team trained teachers and community leaders on how to support children with visible scars. Step by step, the silence and shame began to fade. What started with one girl and a cardboard box became a movement. Ebony went back to her school not to hide, but to lead. She stood on the same stage where she once cried. This time, she smiled. She looked at the students and said, "I used to wear a box. Now, I wear a crown. And you can too." Her fire didn't destroy her. It built something beautiful. Through the Cartons to Crowns Foundation, Ebony turned her pain into power, and helped others do the same.
Zawadi now travels across Kenya, not just as a fashion designer, but as a mentor and big sister to many young girls. She visits schools, villages, and women's groups, carrying her sewing machine and her story. She teaches tailoring but also teaches something deeper: confidence, courage, and self-worth. Most of the girls she meets have been through tough times just like she once did. Some have lost parents, others have been left behind or told they are not enough. But when they see Zawadi, they see proof that pain doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning. One day, Zawadi is invited to BBC Africa for an interview. Sitting in front of the camera in a brightly patterned dress made by her team, she looks calm, strong, and full of grace. The interviewer asks her, "Zawadi, what made you unstoppable?" She takes a small breath, smiles gently, and says, "Being left was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I was never empty. I was the fortune." That one sentence touches millions. It goes viral again, reminding people across the world that the real treasure isn't found in others. It's found within. And Zawadi, once heartbroken and forgotten, had become the real definition of wealth.